I met my friend Dirk when we were in first grade. We had the same teacher, Mrs. O'Lane. We went to school here, Yolanda Elementary, where according to the new signs, they don't let kids smoke anymore. Our principal's name was Harry Peters. I'm not kidding. That was his real name. Imagine being 6 years old and trying to say that with a straight face. They say that the first school superintendent in Oregon will never have a school named after him. His name was John Outhouse. Maybe we should have taken the moniker as a bad omen for the future of Oregon's schools, but I digress. Looking back at this photograph of Mrs. O'Lane's class, it should have been evident to anyone that Dirk had a mischievous spirit. It was in his eyes even then. We were all excited on picture day, even me. Dirk grew up in this house. It had a huge backyard, big enough for a galloping, hairy dog named Buffy. During the summers between 6th and 8th grades, we used to have sleepovers in Dirk's backyard. We would stay awake almost all night, looking at the stars and asking each other questions to freak each other out. Things like, what do you think is on the other side of the stars? Or, what is God really like? Although we were only 12, we were starting to ask ourselves the questions we would be asking the rest of our lives. We went to Yolanda Elementary all the way through 6th grade. The school had a new library built in 1970 after the first library burned down. It wasn't until years later that Dirk confessed to me that he was the one who at age 9 had set the school on fire. Back then, local papers were full of pictures of the charred remains as the school district searched for clues as to who torched the building. The guilty party in this case was never caught or convicted, at least not for this particular crime. It was here on this playground that my jock friend Dirk started protecting me from the recess bullies. I didn't know until later that this was also the time he started drinking. When choosing up sides for Smear the Queer, I was almost always the last one chosen by the team captains, beating out only a thin-boned, homely girl with thick glasses named Mary. Dirk blazed the trail through puberty. He was the strongest, the hairiest, and he was even the fastest at sprinting. But I was the second fastest. I think that's because I was afraid of big kids, and I used to run all the way home after school. Our house looked exactly like Dirk's, except we had a lot of funny signs and painted plywood cutouts of cartoon characters. My parents have lived in this house for over 42 years. It's 2 blocks from Dirk's house and 4 blocks from our elementary school. Dirk's parents kept a bar at his house filled with liquor in the living room. My parents rarely drank, but I remember seeing Dirk's dad, tongs in hand, picking ice out of a crystal bucket. It didn't register at the time because I didn't really know what alcohol was. I just wasn't that curious about those things. I was more curious as to why Dirk had decided to paint his bedroom psychedelic black and white, and just how he was able to get away with that. In later years, he would tell me his addiction started back then, and by junior high he was regularly swapping out water for vodka and his parents' stash and getting drunk. Our junior high school principal was Mr. Buckley, a deacon at the Southern Baptist Church our family belonged to. The junior high was conveniently located across the street from our elementary school. Also conveniently, when I started 7th grade there, my mother decided to get a job, and she got one working in my school library. By that time, I was wearing thick glasses and metal braces with headgear to straighten out my teeth. I watched as Dirk got stronger every day playing quarterback for the football team and playing baseball. I was an occasional athlete, but usually dropped off my teams in order to be in the school musical. Dirk was always under a lot of pressure from his dad to be a big football star. By 9th grade, Dirk and his friends were taking his family car, this 1967 Buick Special, out at night. They would roll it down the driveway and go on joyrides all over town. I know that while I was out with my cheerleader girlfriends toilet papering someone's driveway, Dirk would be simultaneously slashing car tires somewhere. Dirk's dad was our high school guidance counselor, and my dad was the vice principal. They both worked at Thurston High School in Springfield, the school that later became famous for Kip Kinkle, the troubled teen who murdered his parents with a gun before going to school and shooting randomly at kids in the cafeteria. Dirk would never have been that unhinged. He was pretty extreme for his day, but he was always really nice to me. Somehow, the bond we formed as children lasted forever, despite our differences. I don't know why he liked me. Maybe because I listened. One Friday night, when we were in high school, there was a knock at my window. Dirk was outside. My room doubled as my father's den, so it was filled with deer heads and a big locked gun cabinet. Sometimes I could even smell the deer carcass hanging next to me in the garage. Anyway, I think Dirk and I were about 15. I hadn't talked to him a whole lot because he'd run away a few times and was being grounded for weeks at a time. He came into my room and sat down on the bed and burst into tears without ever saying a word. I had never seen him cry about anything before. For years, I never knew what that was all about. It was 17 years later when his parents called me and asked me to participate in an intervention that they told me I was his best friend, and that he had come to my house to cry that night years earlier because his gay uncle had committed suicide. His only other uncle still works as a Hollywood movie producer with stars like Stallone and Willis. A few years after high school, Dirk went into the Army. Because he later strenuously objected to the Army having weapons of mass destruction, he was dishonorably discharged. After leaving the Army, he got married and had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Their family lived in a small town in Washington State near Tacoma. The intervention was horrible. I sat around a table with him, his parents, and 2 of their friends, his wife, and his employer. When it was my turn to talk, I cried so much I could barely say anything. I pleaded with him to give his children some semblance of the loving homes that we had grown up in. Our parents weren't perfect, but they did their best, and I thought he should do the same. Dirk initially refused treatment, in the process telling his parents that I was the only one who had ever understood him. In thinking about this today, I ask myself, is it possible to really know another person, even when that person thinks you know them better than anyone? Dirk's drug addictions led him to lying to get money from his friends, even me. He tumbled into a downward spiral of treatment and relapse. Finally, desperately needing cash for a fix, he held up a convenience store with a steak knife, where he got away with around $42 in cash. After the robbery, his second wife turned him in, and then she ran off with another man. Dirk had more than 20 warrants out for his arrest when he was finally caught. He's been in jail for more than 4 years with at least another year to go. We've been writing a few times a year. In one of his letters, he told me that for an entire year he never got to see any daylight. Eventually, he was moved to another facility and now gets out of his 2-man cell to exercise, go to church, and to work. They even let him go to band practice. In his letters to me, he writes a lot about Jesus. This is ironic because while he's been in jail, I've converted to Judaism. I know he prays for my salvation. Today he writes to me from jail that the rock band he's in plays Christian music. He wants me to do a documentary on him and the other members of his rock group and how much they've changed since they've been incarcerated. He's also told me that he has things to say to me that will probably have to wait until we are on a higher plane. I wonder to myself what he could be talking about. I fear that his new religious leanings mean he thinks less of me now. I wonder whether his troubled life is an indicator of things he always wanted to say to me if I would have just listened. I feel badly that I wasn't able to do more for my childhood friend. Even if I did know him better than anyone, I still feel there is so much I don't know or understand. And just as when we were children, I wonder in awe of the puzzles of life, I still wonder what lies beyond the moon, the sun, and the stars. Only now, I wonder too whether my dear friend will ever find someone who really understands and loves him.